When a small West African nation stands up to a global superpower, the world notices. But when Burkina Faso's president Ibrahim Traoré gave Israel a 72-hour ultimatum, no one expected what would happen next. Silence, defiance, and then a move that could reshape international politics forever. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't just breaking news, it's a geopolitical earthquake. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of the fearless Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has become a rising symbol of Pan-African strength, pushing back against foreign interference, reclaiming natural resources, and now setting diplomatic boundaries with global powers. The trigger? Israel's actions in Gaza and their impact across the global south, particularly Africa. Traoré's government took a bold moral stance, publicly condemning Israeli policies and issuing a 72-hour deadline for diplomatic clarification or action. The clock was ticking, the world watched, and Netanyahu said nothing. Traoré's message was clear. Burkina Faso will not be silent in the face of what it perceives as injustice. But instead of a response from Israel, the world witnessed silence. No acknowledgement, no statement, no dialogue. So Traoré acted. Within hours of the deadline expiring, Burkina Faso announced a major policy shift, suspending all diplomatic contact with Israel and calling for an African Union emergency session on Israeli-African relations. The message was not just for Netanyahu. It was a signal to the entire world. Africa is no longer a passive observer in global affairs. What followed was nothing short of historic. Protests erupted across West Africa, not against Traoré, but in support of him. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, thousands marched holding signs reading, "Africa is not silent, and we stand with Gaza." Pan-African leaders began weighing in. Mali's leadership echoed Traoré's call for stronger African unity. Ghanaian parliamentarians issued statements of solidarity. Even nations traditionally silent on Middle Eastern affairs began to voice concern, inspired by Burkina Faso's bold diplomacy. Has the silence from Netanyahu triggered the loudest reaction Africa has ever made on this issue? Possibly, because this time, the global south isn't backing down. Traoré's actions mark a fundamental shift in global alliances. For decades, African nations were treated as secondary players in foreign policy, their opinions overlooked, their voices ignored. But now, nations like Burkina Faso are refusing to be politically invisible. Daftar ni silence and Natna. This is not just about Israel or Netanyahu. This is about the assertion of African sovereignty, the reshaping of global alliances, the end of silent diplomacy, and a rising belief that Africa's voice must be heard, loud, proud, and without apology. And if you're wondering how serious this is, just look at the reactions. EU diplomats are quietly scrambling to assess African sentiment. US officials are concerned about losing influence. And across social media, African youth are rallying behind the hashtag #AfricaStandsTall. This is part of a much bigger plan Traoré has championed since seizing power, to build a strong, self-reliant, independent Africa, free from colonial shackles and geopolitical manipulation. He's building infrastructure, reclaiming gold reserves, launching digital projects, and now reshaping Africa's foreign policy posture. His leadership is sending shockwaves from Paris to Tel Aviv, from Washington to Brussels. This isn't the Africa the West expected. This is a new Africa, one that demands respect, one that defends its values, and one that will not be ignored. The silence from Netanyahu was loud, but Traoré's response? It was thunder. It was the roar of a continent rising. So we ask you, is this the moment Africa reclaims its diplomatic power? Let us know in the comments. Should other African leaders follow Traoré's bold lead? Subscribe to African Spotlight 24 for the stories the mainstream won't tell you. Drop your thoughts, share this video. Africa is no longer silent. Africa is leading. Welcome to African Spotlight 24, your premier source for news and current affairs from across the continent. We're glad you're here. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe, like, and turn on notification to stay up to date with the latest news and analysis. Your support helps us reach more people. Disclaimer: the content of this video is based on credible, publicly available information and is intended for educational, analytical, and informational purposes only. African Spotlight 24 does not promote hate, violence, misinformation, or political unrest. Our goal is to deliver thoughtful insights, highlight local voices, and encourage informed conversations throughout Africa.
Our next story is more about what happened. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who ignored a deadline rather than the deadline itself. On Thursday afternoon, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré gave Netanyahu 72 hours to apologize for what he called racist remarks against Africans. On Sunday evening, Traoré extended the deadline by 24 hours. What is news is the speed and scale of their reaction. It will be held in the Saudi city of Jeddah on Friday. His exact words were, "We're like the blacks, the real blacks, not the fake blacks." Now, his office did try to clarify the statement. They said he was talking about policy, not race. In such a scenario, a president can afford to be flexible. He can choose to ignore the controversy and focus on stability. But Traoré chose not to. He took on Benjamin Netanyahu and won. They're calling for a boycott, a cultural boycott of Israel. Because sometimes you need a good slap to wake up from a dream. Similar protests have been reported in other parts of the world. In Paris, for instance, protesters blocked traffic outside the Israeli embassy there, and in London, they plan to do the same on Friday. But Ibrahim Traoré was not having it. The Burkina president had every reason to take on Netanyahu. Let me tell you why. This is what the OIC said in a statement. It said, and I'm quoting, "They've protested his policies, his judicial reform." Many of these protesters are angry at Netanyahu for two reasons. Perhaps because he does not realize the gravity of the situation, or perhaps because he is hoping that African countries will forgive him. Well, so far, only Egypt and Kenya have condemned him. The rest have either suspended trade or broken diplomatic ties, and this includes South Africa. The government there has recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv. No. 1. They say he is auto-compiling. And no. 2. They say he is becoming too friendly with the far right. In fact, some of these protesters have called Netanyahu a fascist. So, when Netanyahu made those comments about Africa, the protesters felt vindicated. It was as if their prime minister had proved their point. He called Africans, quote-unquote, real blacks, and sparked a massive diplomatic storm. The urgent meeting of the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers will discuss the escalation of the aggression against the Palestinian people by the Israeli occupation forces and the racist remarks made by the Israeli Prime Minister against the people of Africa. 1 minute they were condemning the Israeli Prime Minister. The next they were announcing the suspension of trade. And this is what the foreign ministers of the Gulf Cooperation Council said in a joint statement. That's something to watch out for. But right now, there is reason to celebrate. This is a rare moment for the African continent. For once, they're united, not as divided as they are usually portrayed, but united. They've united to call out racism, and this should send a message to the world. If there is one thing that unites Africa, it is the African identity. The African identity. That's something that no one can take away. It reads, and I quote, "The foreign ministers affirmed in the strongest terms their total condemnation and absolute rejection of the Israeli Prime Minister's racist statements. They also affirmed their support for the measures taken by the brotherly country of Burkina Faso and that of the racist statements." So, the foreign ministers of the GCC, their meeting in Jeddah, they released this statement after their meeting. But when the Israeli Prime Minister failed to apologize even by the new deadline, the Burkina president took a bold step. He broke off diplomatic ties with Israel. And this is what everyone was waiting for. This is what everyone was waiting for. They wanted to see how the Arab world would react to Ibrahim Traoré's ultimatum. The general consensus was that they would rally around their own. But no one expected the kind of response that came. The Arab world has come out in support of Burkina Faso. That's not news. Meanwhile, the OIC, that's the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, has called an emergency meeting. Now, all this outrage is over a comment that Netanyahu made last month. In recent months, thousands of Israelis have demonstrated against their prime minister, and it's not like Netanyahu to back down. In fact, he's dug in. The question is why? Why is he refusing to apologize? Now, Traore could have let things slide. After all, he took office just 5 months ago. He led a military coup. He's still consolidating power, but what happens next? Will African countries isolate Israel? Will they push Israel out of the African Union, the AU? Even as we speak, hundreds of protesters have gathered outside the Israeli embassy in Pretoria, so put together, it's a major embarrassment for Israel, but perhaps a necessary one.